Welcome back to Act on Mental Health. My name is Sean Hardy, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor based here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. On this channel, we talk about acceptance and commitment therapy, and we're learning how ACT can help us. Whether you're a clinician like myself using ACT and therapy, or if you're a client who's been introduced to ACT and you're trying to figure out how it works and how to utilize it in your life. Or maybe you're a graduate student and you're wondering if ACT is the right therapeutic modality for you. This is the channel for you. So if you've been following along, we are going through the ACT roadmap, and we are in session 6 today. So we've talked a lot about the 3 phases, and we are going to be starting phase 3 today in the engage phase. So phase 1 is open, and really trying to develop a foundation for a client to be open to their experiences rather than using avoidance as their main go-to. So we talk about acceptance, about letting go of the struggle and how the struggle is often the problem. And then we also introduce cognitive diffusion and using some of these techniques to unhook ourselves from those thoughts so that we can be open to the experience that shows up and then know what to do next. In phase 2, we talk about aware. And aware is really being able to understand the importance of contacting the present moment. We can only act in the now. And so helping us through our 5 senses and also understanding kind of what the thoughts and internal experiences that are showing up in this moment. We also talk about the observing self and self as context, as ACT discusses. And we talk maybe a little bit about understanding ourselves as a perspective, kind of like a tripod, that we have a perspective that is I, here, and now. And whatever shows up, our thoughts or feelings are not us. We are the observer. We're the knower. And so there's just some distance that we can create. So once we have developed phase 1 of being open and phase 2 of being aware, we are now ready for phase 3, which is engage. Now, if you're following the roadmap, I put the ACT matrix kind of right before or right in between the aware phase and the engage phase. But you can really utilize the ACT matrix at any point during the therapy process, and just kind of helps to kind of tie all these phases and processes and ACT together. Now, a client or therapist for that matter doesn't need to know everything. We just want to get enough a lay of the land so that we can move around. So the ACT matrix is a really helpful diagram that people can utilize and something they can easily remember and draw it on a napkin. So today we're going to kind of build off of that. And so we're going to go from the ACT matrix to session 6, which is willingness in action. Now, if you've followed my channel at all, you will know that I have talked a lot about willingness and how that's a master skill and ACT. It's something that can really make the difference between moving towards the life you want and staying stagnant in the life that you don't want. And so we're going to talk in depth about willingness today. Now, in this session for clients, we're trying to get them to a place where they can move toward what matters, even when uncomfortable things like thoughts and feelings are present. We're not trying to remove these passengers on our bus that we'll talk about. We're really trying to learn how to drive our life or our bus in a way that can move us toward our values. So we're going to be using the passengers on the bus metaphor as the main part of this session, but I want you to kind of understand the end in mind. We're really trying to help them not try to eliminate their thoughts and feelings, but to go with them and toward the light that they want. So we're going to be moving from I'll act when I feel better to I can act when I feel this. And this is a really powerful session for clients. There are some good videos on YouTube you can use, so I'll just kind of mention those. If you just look for the passengers on the bus and put act in there. I believe Joe Oliver has one that's really excellent, just an animated one that's, I think, about 4 minutes. So you can show that or give that as maybe a follow-up for homework for clients to view. But I'm going to kind of show you how I do this in a session so that you can kind of more or less kind of take the gist of what I'm utilizing here and then go for it. I also want to mention, if you want to download the ACT roadmap, you can go to my website, seanhardy.com/resources, and download it there. So the way that I set this up is I use a pen as an example, and I call this my willingness pen. Now, if they were in front of me, I may put this on a table, like if I have a coffee table in front of me, or I might have this right next to them on the chair or couch. And what I'll say is, I'll say something like, this is my willingness pen. Now, willingness is different than trying. Trying is a word that we use a lot to describe effort toward something that we're wanting to put into action. But willingness is a choice. And so I want to demonstrate that by having you try to pick up this willingness pen. All right, can you do that for me? Can you try to pick it up? And so I'll have this right next to them or in front of them on the coffee table. And usually what they'll do is they'll just go right to it and pick it up. And I say, no. I don't want you to actually pick it up. I want you to try. Okay, can you do that for me? Can you just try to pick this up? And eventually what they'll do is they'll just kind of hover, like they're really, really trying, but they're not actually doing it. Or they'll look at you confused, like, what do you want me to do? I either pick it up or I don't. And I'll say something like, exactly, that's what I want to demonstrate to you. There is a difference between trying and willingness. Willingness is the difference between whether you pick it up or not. And so when we're talking today about willingness, I want you to think about it as either a choice to pick it up or a choice not to pick it up. Either you're willing to do this or you're unwilling to do this. We tend to use the word try. And the way that trying hits me as a therapist, when I have a client who says they didn't pick up or didn't complete their homework, but they tried, it sounds to me like they want credit for partial effort, or like it was in their head and they had thought about it and they want at least partial credit. But whether they get that from me is not the point. In my mind, they didn't do it. They were unwilling to do it. Now, I'm not here to shame anybody or cast a judgment. We just want to make sure that there's a difference. You have the choice either to be willing with your experiences or you're unwilling when the experience shows up. So you can set that up using the trying pen. Another kind of example that I might use to show the difference is, imagine that you're at a pool and it's a nice summer day, and the first thing you do as you are there in your swimsuit is to test to see if the water's cold. And so you put your toes in, and that's kind of like trying. It's kind of putting your toes in, seeing whether or not this is going to be too much for you. And so when you put your toes in, do you just call it a day and you just say, I'm not going to swim today? Well, for some people they do, but a lot of us, when we made a decision to go to the pool, we intend on swimming. And so we just might need some time to kind of work up that courage. Willingness is jumping in. It's fully immersing yourself in getting into that experience, even though you may be cold at first. You know that you're going to adjust as you go forward with it. So we want to have an all-in kind of willingness when it comes to that choice of whether or not I'm going to go forward into experience or I'm not. Once I've taught the willingness part of it, then I segue into the passengers on the bus metaphor. So I might say something like, the last session I gave you a map of your life using that ACT matrix. And if you remember it, there was a line that was horizontal and with two ends. And behaviorally, In any given situation, you can move toward the life that you want, toward your values, or away from your values. And today we're going to actually practice that moving toward your values using a metaphor called the passengers on the bus. And this is a great metaphor to look back on when your internal world is getting loud or it's just getting messy and you're uncomfortable. You can start to go back to this metaphor. And so the way I want to set this up is that you are the bus driver to your life, which is the bus. And there are passengers that have gotten onto your bus. These passengers are thoughts, feelings, memories, urges, and these are things that have gotten on your bus at some point in your life. Now, the road is your values. And let's say you're going toward this final destination, which is Valued Mountain. Now, this Valued Mountain is whatever that you want your life to be about, how you want to feel about yourself in this life, how you want others around you to feel about you. And this is where you're going. Now, at any given moment, you can make a decision whether to continue toward Valued Mountain or you can go away from it, maybe on a side road or just getting around something that might be uncomfortable. And all the while, these passengers are talking. Now, some of your passengers are unruly. They're kind of jerks. You're complaining. They're making their opinions known. And some passengers are quiet. You're good passengers. They're just kind of along for the ride, and maybe they might remind you of some things that they remember in the past or some lessons that you've learned along the way. Now, some of these unruly passengers tend to dominate your attention. And as you're the driver of your bus and you're making these decisions of, I want to go toward this kind of value, these passengers start to get louder and louder. And you have some options. You could try to quiet them down and argue with them. And I think a lot of people do, is you want to challenge those thoughts. You want to argue with those feelings. You want to correct them when they're wrong about their criticisms or complaints. You could try to pacify them and just go along with it and say, well, I guess I'll avoid this social situation, even though it's toward the life that I want. You could stop the bus and kick them off. But these passengers are unlike other passengers. They have a unlimited ticket, meaning they are along for the ride. Once they get on and in your life, they're there. And so you could try to kick them out. And a lot of people do. They stop their life and they try to maybe get rid of anxiety, they get rid of the depression, they try to get themselves in a place where maybe they try to bring some other passengers in along the ride, maybe a motivational coach or maybe some positive thinking, and their bus gets pretty crowded. Now, I want to ask you, who are some of your passengers? Who are some of maybe there are some thoughts, maybe a type of passenger, but what are some of the passengers on your bus? And who is the loudest passenger right now? And what do they do when you try to move toward your values? Or what do they do when you move away from your values? Now, there's some examples that I might offer here, such as maybe you have the worrier that is always saying that there's going to be some disaster along the way, that maybe you're going too fast, or you got to watch out for this, you got to watch out for that. That's maybe worried about time and trying to rush things. You might have an inner critic who's just really hard and negative about you. You might have a perfectionist. Hey, this isn't quite right. You can't move on until this is just right. You might have the fear of failure, the shame passenger that doesn't want to be seen or doesn't want their flaws to be out there. Or you might have that angry protector kind of passenger that always has an opinion that they need to share. They always want to get their way. I want you to kind of play with this a little bit and kind of think about your life and think about that internal dialogue that you have. I want you to think about, what does each passenger say? How does that work in your life? And what are they trying to stop you from doing? So, in this part of the session will be more like a discussion, a dialogue, and so we might take some time to, or maybe pull some things from past sessions that they've said, and maybe they've already identified some of these things, and I'll incorporate that into this session. Uh, what I want to do here is I want to maybe offer a different perspective from them because I think a lot of times they almost make the passengers their enemy, and we have to realize that these passengers are are there to bring something to your attention. Now, I like to think of, I forget who said that. There was a moral psychologist. I think his name is Jonathan Haidt. And he said that your brain has two jobs. Um, One is to keep you alive, and the second is to make you right. And he was talking, I think, in The Righteous Mind is the book that he was talking about politics and how we all have a righteous perspective, or at least we think we're right. And that's our brain. It just tends to have those two missions in place. Now, are those bad? I would say not. I would say that they're trying to keep you alive. Like your brain, those thoughts, those feelings, all that internal stuff, it's there because it wants to keep you safe, and it wants to, in whatever way, is trying to make your life more comfortable, avoid that pain. And so it's hard to hear that when you're just getting all negative, but maybe look at that perspective of how are these thoughts serving me? What is it trying to help me with? The other thought is, how is it trying to make me right? And just kind of looking for some of those things. So you can have a good conversation here and kind of play around with it. What we want to lead to as we kind of go through this is start to clarify their values. Now, you can bring up some of the values that they mentioned in the ACT matrix and start to tie some of those passengers to, what does that passenger say when this value shows up? When you have, something that's important to you, like friends or being a loving father. What does the angry passenger, and that value, how do they collide? How do they complement? And so you can have some good dialogue that way, kind of connecting it to their values that they've mentioned. Also connecting the pain that they're trying to prevent you from, trying to keep you safe or avoid that, to the value that's at risk. Because whenever you try to avoid that pain, you're also moving away from that value. And so this is just a good metaphor to kind of live in the session. It's something for them to kind of think over. What you want to do is you want to set it up for further discussion of values, and you want to begin to kind of seed committed action. And what you're trying to do here is to think small over the heroic. So you're not looking for big actions out of this. You're looking for subtle course corrections. So sending an honest text. That might be a way to connect to somebody. Maybe attend one small group meeting, or maybe going for a 10-minute walk. Journal, just something basic. You're really looking for something that can help them to course correct and get back toward the life that they're wanting. And if you haven't already, this is where I might bring in something to help them to keep track of things when they show up, and to keep track of their willingness in that moment. Like, were they willing or were they unwilling? And so I like to use either an emotion or anger diary. Whether they're dealing with anger or not, there's some good ones out there that help them to track like the situation and what they did, like all the things that showed up. Now, really helping them to start to notice rather than try to fix it. We really want them to become aware of how they're being hooked. and what they did in response. So usually something like the situation, what showed up inside. So what passengers started showing up, thoughts and feelings, and then what they did. And I want them to evaluate, was it a toward move or an away move? And then the last thing is what they learned from it. And so this is just good, like homework for them to do to start to track their internal experiences. So that wraps up session 6. And this is going to set up a further discussion on clarifying their values. And so we'll talk about the values and goals in the next session. Thanks for joining me today. Remember, your journey towards a more purposeful and mindful life begins with a single click.